That music and the lighting change is going to dog you for the rest of your life. Do you realise that?
I love the way all of you just went...
I know. Yeah, I know. They're going to play, play that at your funeral.
Brilliant. That's the point. That's the point. Yeah, yeah. Approaching menace at my funeral. Thanks, Richard.
Listen, this guy's reported from war zones. He's clashed one-to-one with world leaders. And now, as we know, because we can't stop reminding you, he's the formidable host and the very successful new host of one of the UK's longest-running quiz shows, Mastermind.
And he's a multi-award winner, legendary broadcaster, Clive Myrie. He's delved into his past in his new memoir, exploring family history, revealing what it's like to report on the hardest-hitting stories of our time. Clive Myrie, it's great to see you. The book
wonderful to be here. Great to see
Everything
you
is Everything, and I have to say, for anybody involved in journalism or, you know, a viewer, you should read it. It's a terrific read, and but it's full of very difficult experiences, as well as, you know, advice on journalism and broadcasting and all the rest of it. One of the things I wanted to start with was, I had no idea, when you were a child, you were actually mute at the age of 4. And you have gone from being that child of 4 who could not
speak... To a loudmouth.
Speak.
Say it. Say it.
to having to say things quickly, fluently, without mistake, on a programme like Mastermind, where you cannot do things twice, because then you've allowed someone to hear the question.
Oh, yes. I was so shy as a kid, and I was an only child for maybe the first 3-4 years of my life. And as a... Oh, look at that, eh?
Yeah.
I had hair then.
What a cutie.
I had hair then.
So was it that you couldn't talk?
No,
or
no, no.
Wouldn't
no,
talk?
no, no, I wouldn't talk.
You wouldn't talk?
I wouldn't talk.
Oh.
Now, I was fine at home. But at school, at preschool, I just wouldn't communicate with the teachers for several weeks. And eventually my mum was called in. I put all this in the book. And the teacher said, I'm really, really sorry, but your son won't communicate with us, and we think he should see a child psychologist. My mum, having been a teacher in Jamaica, having dealt with all kinds of kids, shy ones, confident ones, sporty ones, whatever, she said, look, he's just shy. Leave him be, he will come too. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I did speak, and my first words were, my mum and dad have lions and tigers in the house. And the teacher was like, he has got to go to a child psychologist.
There's something going on.
Absolutely. So my mum was hauled back in.
He's having visions.
Yes, he's having visions. What's going on? These animals running around the house. And my mum burst out laughing and said, no, it's the little china ornaments that they had on the mantelpiece that I had, you know, that I was talking about. But it was an interesting time because I was shy. A lot of, you know, second-generation black kids growing up in those days didn't have many black, you know, school friends. You know, it was an alien environment for their parents, role models, absolutely. And, you know, there were some black kids who were taken erroneously off to remedial classes and separated because of this perception that there was something wrong with them.
So did you think that your skin colour was going to be a problem, an issue, when you decided to get into journalism? Did you worry about it?
The bottom line was I didn't see anyone in journalism who looked like me.
No, absolutely.
Apart
from
Trevor.
The big man, the big man, Trevor, who is a wonderful... And he came to the launch of the book, and half the BBC was there, and everyone was just...
Yeah.
How is he these days?
You know, this titan. He's in early 80s now. He's looking great. He's looking trim. He was absolutely wonderful.
Anyway, go on. Take us back to that.
And so, so, you know, I sort of grew up watching... I grew up in a northern mill town, Bolton, Lancashire, right? It's a bit grey. It's a bit wet. It's a bit cold. And for my parents, that was a massive jolt, having come from the sunshine of the Caribbean. But I saw through the medium of my paper round... I would be reading the newspapers and seeing all these stories going on in South Africa and Australia and America and Japan and all these places. And I would watch this programme called Wicker's World with a guy called Alan Wicker. And I'd be like this little kid looking at the TV and this stuff about, you know, plastic surgery in California. There are people chopping up their faces. They're absolutely fine, but they're chopping up their faces. And I'd watch this stuff on Wicker's World and think, wow, there is a whole world beyond this mill town. And I want to do that. But Alan is, you know, middle-class, patrician, white, sounded like, you know, someone very posh, didn't sound like me, didn't look like me. And I thought, God, I want to do that, but how do I get into it? And then this bloke appeared on the screen who looked like me, a guy called Trevor McDonald. And he sounded like my mum does on the phone. hello, hello, a little bit, hello. And I thought, God, he looks like me. Maybe I could do it. And it was him, which was why we've become friends over the years. It was him that got me into this business, simply by doing his job. You can't be what you can't see. And I saw it, and it was him.
Absolutely. And so you've gone from there to, as we know, reporting from Kyiv as the Russians invaded.
Last time I was there, I saw you.
Yeah, exactly. We met at the airport.
Yeah, that's right.
And, plaudits, of course, for your bravery, for staying there with your team.
Whole team.
And,
whole team behind
because,
that.
you don't do it alone, of course.
No way. Absolutely not.
But the fact that you were there actually led to the King having a conversation with you where he identified you from that position, didn't he? What
absolutely.
Did he say?
It was a reception at the BBC celebrating the World Service, and he was there with Queen Camilla. She wasn't Queen at that moment, and he said, "You're the man off the roof."
You're the man off the roof.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, he said, "You're the man off the roof." It must be cold up there. It's pretty cold up there. I said, "Yeah, I had my long johns on." The whole time I had my long johns on. I mean, he's a lovely, lovely guy. I mean, for my pet, lovely guy, the King, lovely King.
Yeah. What a lovely guy.
I know, what a lovely guy the King is. But very personable and charming. And certainly for my parents' generation, there was a reverence for the royal family. And my dad told me that he was, he cried when he heard that the Queen had died. And my mum said that, the brightest jewel in the crown jewels has been dimmed. There's a reverence there, and it was sad for them to sort of see the royal family go through that pain.
Well, Clive, let's talk about your parents' generation and your generation, because it is an incredibly important generation in the history of this country.
Windrush.
It is the Windrush generation. There'll never be a generation like it again.
No.
It was the breakthrough generation, but it was not plain sailing, to coin a phrase, was it, for your parents?
No, not at all, not at all. What you've got to remember is that, at the end of the Second World War, this country was on its knees. It had won, but at great cost. Not just in treasure, but in human lives, of course. And the country needed to be rebuilt. The problem is you had a lot of people here who had got fed up of rationing. Coventry had been blitzed and parts of the East End had been destroyed, and rebuilding this would have taken a superhuman effort. And there was the possibility for, a lot of indigenous white people to go to Australia, go to Canada, become 10-pound poms, go to South Africa, to move on and rebuild their lives elsewhere. That created a worker shortage here. And that's partly why the Windrush generation ended up having to come here in order to help rebuild this country. But was it easy? Absolutely not. Change is difficult for some. And the level of racism was intense. But it's the strength and the fortitude of that generation that I celebrate in the book. Not just my parents, but all those who came over between 48 and 71. But also their brilliance through that strength in cementing what I think is a fantastic multicultural country.
And I know they had their experience, but also there were a number of children who were left behind by the Windrush generation who then came over, but found themselves without official documents. And that affected two of your brothers.
Yeah, my two older brothers.
One of whom wanted to take his daughter back to Jamaica, but didn't have a British passport and couldn't then make the trip in order to do that, and didn't manage to take his daughter to Jamaica before he died.
Before he died of prostate cancer. That's my older brother, Peter. It's something like, it's a weird figure, something like 6,000 children came accompanied by their parents who had passports and came here as a result of Windrush in 48 up to the early 1970s. 600,000 were left behind. And a lot of those kids that came on their parents' passports. But their parents were citizens under the 1948 British Nationality Act. So it was the equivalent of travelling from Kingston, Jamaica to Bolton was the equivalent of travelling from Leeds to Wigan or Manchester to London. They were citizens. They didn't need passports.
But then that caused problems down the line.
That caused problems down the line because throughout the history of that migratory period, there has been opposition to mass migration.
Well,
and that caused issues.
And I want to, before we talk to the government minister, and I know that you know, there are certain guidelines, BBC about neutrality and, you know, not expressing opinions on certain
Quite right,
things.
too.
What, though, are you able to say about your reaction to Suella Braverman's comments, the Home Secretary, yesterday, where she said that basically multiculturalism has failed and there's not enough integration?
Well, look, I mean, I can't comment on what anyone in political life says. And frankly, my opinion is irrelevant. The facts are, from my own personal experience, that having lived in America for several years, Washington, LA correspondent, lived in Japan, lived in Singapore, lived in South Africa, lived in France, lived in Belgium. This is the country where I'd want to live, and that's why I'm here.
When your parents...
And that says it all. When
your parents were suffering the very worst of the racism, the prejudice that you alluded to after they got here, did they ever wish they hadn't come?
No, not necessarily because of the racism, but simply, certainly as far as my father was concerned, he was, you know, he had his own business in Jamaica. He ended up having to moving here. And he found it difficult adjusting to sort of, you know, being an employee for somebody else and the climate and a sense that he just didn't fit in somehow. My mother, I think, never regretted coming here. But I think my father did, and I write about that extensively in the book.
Well, the title of the book is Everything is Everything.
All is well.
Which means...
all is well. Yeah, exactly. All is well. And, you know, no matter how bad it gets in life, you know, always try to sort of be positive and try to reach for that other side where the light is shining through the tunnel. That's the key.
Clive, it's just great to see you.
Thank you. Lovely to see you too. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.